Alrighty. So good evening and thanks everyone for joining us for this live-streamed presentation in collaboration with the Los Alamos Mountaineers. This virtual event is being brought to you by the Pajarito Environmental Education Center. We're known as PEEC, and we operate the Los Alamos Nature Center. The Nature Center is currently closed due to COVID-19, but we still have lots of ways you can interact and connect with nature. Check out our website, it's at the bottom there, peaknature.org. For more live streamed presentations like this one. And I do just want to give a quick shout out to our wonderful members, our donors and volunteers and staff and partners like the Mountaineers who are making it possible for us to continue offering programming at this time. And with that, I think Joy will go ahead and start the Mountaineers meeting.
All right, looks great. Hi, this is Zach Baker, the president of the Mountaineers. Welcome to our 6th online meeting since March. I don't think we thought it was going to go this long, but here we are. So thanks for sticking with us. We have nearly a record. So it looks like lots of people are excited to hear about Coco's book about the caldera. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I have to throw a big shout out to PEEC for helping us run these things. Beth and Krista and Rachel have been dynamite in making this work smoothly, and we couldn't do without them. So without further ado, we have Coco Rae speaking today. Coco is a student success specialist at University of New Mexico, Los Alamos. But when she's not working, she is clearly out hiking. You know, the metaphor is she wrote the book on it. Well, she did. And we're really excited to find out everything that we need to know about hiking in the Valles Caldera.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the Insider's Guide to Valles Caldera, hiking Valles Caldera National Preserve. I'm Coco Rae. I am the author, as they mentioned, of, let's see, one second, sorry. There we go. I am the author of Hiking Trails in Valles Caldera National Preserve. I've been a volunteer at the preserve since 2018, and my guidebook kind of grew accidentally out of reports on trail conditions I had been producing for the preserve. I got about halfway through my project and it was starting to really bug me that there was no guide or map for the public to use on any of the backcountry trails. And I sort of realized that I had enough information to write it myself. And so it turned into a project I hadn't really intended, but it ended up really just being a labor of love, in part because I fell in love with the backcountry and saw trails and lava domes and valleys that I never even knew were there. And I really felt that it was important to share with the community because so many people love the caldera but have not had much of an opportunity to get back in there and explore. So the book came out and it's been incredibly popular, which is great. It was definitely more popular than I thought it was going to be, but I'm happy that so many people are excited to explore this really amazing place. So a little bit about me. As you can see, I love to hike. I have hiked all over the world, Norway, Peru, Kilimanjaro, the Alps, Patagonia, Nepal, and of course I've hiked all over New Mexico as well. I've been here for almost 20 years and New Mexico is probably still my favorite place to be. And while the caldera doesn't offer anything technical, it's certainly not challenging like say Kilimanjaro. There are lots of places to explore and lots of things to find for yourself. And so even if you've been on, you know, much more adventurous trekking, it's still just a magnificent place to have in our backyard. So before I take you along a few of my favorite trails, I want to share a little bit about the history of the Valle. There's a lot back there that people don't really know, and I think it sort of enlivens and enriches the experience when you're out hiking. So the Valle is centered on the intersection of the Jemez Lineament and the Rio Grande Rift. It is a collapsed volcano. That's what a caldera is. And it actually was created by 2 separate eruptions. The first one was about 1.6 million years ago, and the second one was about 1.25 million years ago. And it's the second eruption that has created the way that it appears today. Most calderas are more perfectly round. Ours is a little bit oval shaped. That's because the second eruption didn't quite obliterate the first eruption. And so that's why there's a little leftover from the first one. This eruption was massive. It basically is the reason the Jemez Mountains are there. And it also created the Pajarito and Jemez plateaus, producing more than 100 times more debris than what Mount St. Helens released. But it's actually not a supervolcano. Many people think it is. A supervolcano requires 240 cubic miles of debris, and this one was nowhere near that. But it was still a big one. It is the third largest quaternary period caldera in the United States, which is the last 2.5 million years in geologic time. And the ash deposits, as I said, that created the surrounding plateaus, those are also the home to bandolier cliff dwellings. And so really central to all of the geology in this region. So the initial eruption, obviously, what happens when a caldera is created is the magma sort of rises up like a souffle, and then it explodes and collapses, and it leaves the cauldron or the caldera behind. And so the reason why this isn't just a big empty bowl is because we had later eruptions that formed the lava domes within the caldera, and they formed roughly counterclockwise. They're also why we have multiple valleys. That's why we call it the Valles Caldera, because the lava domes delineate them. Redondo Mountain, the highest peak in the preserve, is actually a resurgent dome. And the difference between the two, a lava dome is like your classic volcano where the magma rises up, erupts, and then you get deposits. A resurgent dome is where the magma rises up but doesn't actually burst. And so the only resurgent dome, as I say, within the caldera is Redondo Mountain, and it is the highest peak. And that one formed really fast. It formed in less than 3,000 years or 30,000 years from the valley floor. And it's apparently it formed so quickly that if people had been living in the area at the time, it would have been fast enough to notice. Fraser Goff has a great book called Valles Caldera, A Geologic History. And he says that it was about the rate of an inch per year. And so that would be noticeable. Of the formations, hopefully you can see my mouse here, the Banco Bonito formation, which is right here, that's the youngest. That was about 40,000 years ago, which is really recent in geologic time. And so the volcano beneath it is not considered extinct. It is dormant. It doesn't look like it's going to do anything major anytime soon. Nobody's worried about it like they are about the Yellowstone one. But there is magma about 4.5 miles below the surface. And then there's quite a bit of geothermal activity on the western side of the preserve, including hot springs and fumaroles. Many of you from around here probably have been to San Antonio hot springs. Those are a result of the geothermal activity on the western side of the preserve. The other thing that makes the geologic history of the preserve kind of special is that the eruption produced some of the finest quality obsidian or volcanic glass in all of North America. It's incredibly high quality in terms of lacking many inclusions, and they make excellent tools. And this is why some of the earliest people in the regions were probably attracted to the area because of that obsidian, along with hunting and gathering opportunities. We know of at least 350 plants that were collected and used for ritual purposes as well as medicinal purposes, and to this day by the descendants of the people who first came through the Southwest. There were clearly seasonal camps very early on for the hunting and gathering, as well as quarrying and producing obsidian tools. There are archaeological sites all over the preserve. I think only 30% of the preserve has been documented up to this point in terms of its archaeology, but we know of multiple sites for producing tools scattered around the preserve's boundaries. And then another thing that's kind of interesting on the Banco Bonito side of the preserve, the Banco Bonito field houses were built around 1400 AD. And these are 1 or 2 room sort of square structures that we think were used for summer farming camps. And what makes that so special is that's the highest elevation example of farming that's currently known. And so it's further documentation of the long history of human presence here, as well as the long ties to the communities of Native folk in the Southwest. The caldera itself and Redondo Mountain in particular are sacred to most Native communities out here, in part because almost everybody has a connection to it in one way or another. And Redondo Mountain in particular is really important. And so people are asked not to try to summit the peak, the highest point in the preserve. There are no trails that go up there, but people are asked to stay off of it out of respect for the Native traditions. We know for Spanish presence in the Caldera region in the late 1500s, there doesn't seem to have been a whole lot of activity by the Spanish, despite what was obviously really good grazing land, mostly because the growing season was so short and the winters were so harsh, and it'd be hard to get animals out before the snows flew. So it's really not ranched intensively until the early 1800s, and it only happened kind of accidentally. There was a family in what is now Las Vegas, New Mexico, the Cabeza de Vaca family, who had been granted 500,000 acres by the Spanish crown when New Mexico was still under Spanish control. But they were never able to totally control or develop that land. And so Las Vegas, New Mexico actually developed it out of a squatter settlement on the Vaca family land. And through a series of court cases, as well as 3 separate governments, first Spain, then Mexico, and then the US territorial government, the Cabeza de Vaca family finally were able to get use of land, but they had to give up their the Las Vegas 500,000 acres, because obviously you can't move Las Vegas at that point. And they were given the opportunity to pick 500,000 acre parcels of their choice anywhere in New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona, in exchange for giving up that claim in Las Vegas. And so the very first parcel that they picked was the Valles Caldera, and that became known as Baca Location Number 1. That is still what it's labeled as on many maps, including even US Forest Service maps. The region has Baca Location Number 1 on it. Craig Martin has a great history of really sort of the Bacas onward, called Valle Grande, a history of Baca Location Number 1 that covers quite a bit of this. And so, as I said, it took 3 separate governments, and then of course there was the Mexican-American War and the Civil War in the American Civil War that got in the way. And so it wasn't until 1876 that the Baca family finally had their title confirmed. And that was after the US Surveying Committee went through and they surveyed it in 4 days. Now, this is 100,000 acres in not very easy territory. And so you'll be amazed to know that it was surveyed very poorly, and it was initially shorted by 10,000 acres. Eventually, a better survey was done, and the Baca family was able to claim the full 100,000, and they were able to then begin using their land properly. They ran quite a bit of sheep, but they shared their grazing rights with their extended family and their neighbors. This was a long-standing tradition in most northern New Mexico communities, just because survival and subsistence were so difficult, and so it made sense to share access to resources. But the Baca family ultimately never were able to hold the land for very long. The late 1800s, the New Mexico territorial period, there was rampant land speculation, and many families lost their original grants. The Bacas were one of many. In fact, there are still court cases winding their way through New Mexico's courts to this day over the speculation era in New Mexico. And so ultimately, the Otero family took over the land in the late 1800s, and they shifted gears. They were still running sheep, but they ran over 20,000 head of sheep. They also introduced 3,000 head of cattle. And if anybody who's listening has any experience with livestock, you know that that is way too many that this land could possibly sustain. So we start seeing problems with overgrazing. The Oteros also ran it in a somewhat feudal system. It was much less friendly and sharing oriented than the Bacas had done. Local shepherds and ranchers could run some of their head on the preserve or on the caldera, but they also were responsible for Oteros herds, and they had to buy all their supply from the Oteros. So you can imagine who came out on top at the end of the season. But the Oteros also were the first to start developing some of the sulfur mines on the western side of the preserve. They were also looking at developing the hot springs as potential tourist attractions, as the possibility of a rail line up towards Jemez Springs was being floated. And they also went in with businessmen in Santa Fe to build a proper road from Santa Fe all the way to the caldera out of the old wagon trail that was really the only way to get up there until then. So the Oteros sort of had this operation until the early 1900s, but they started running into financial difficulty. And so they ultimately decided to sell the land to a timber company from back east and then lease grazing rights from them. And this would be really key because that ultimately led to a separation of timber rights from the land itself. And so what happens is that by 1917, the Oteros not only have they sold the land to the timber company, but they've decided to get out of the grazing business entirely. And so they sell their grazing rights to Frank and George Bond from Espanola. And then the Bond brothers purchased the caldera outright from the timber company in 1918, the following year. However, when they purchased this, the timber company retained an almost 100-year lease on the timber rights and 50% of the mineral rights, which meant that the Bonds owned the land and they could run sheep or cattle on it, they could build things on it, what have you, but the timber company could do whatever it pleased with the timber and a good chunk of the mineral rights. Now, this would be a problem as the century continued, and it's still a problem in many parcels of land in the West. The Bonds built a number of the cabins in what's known as the Cabin District, which is on the northern end of Valle Grande. There's a couple cabins there from the Otero years, but most of those are from the Bonds. They also built 17 sheep camps around the preserve because it's quite a ways from the far back corners all the way to headquarters. And so they had some places where their shepherds could camp out for the season. And then after World War II, when sheep became less popular and the demand for beef increased, the Bonds decided to phase out sheep entirely and shifted straight to cattle. And they had over 12,000 head of cattle. And again, this is far more than the land could sustain. Cattle were newly profitable in part because of demand and also because Highway 4 had been built by the CCC during the Depression. And so now it was actually easier to get cattle to market than ever before. At the same time, because of the building boom after World War II, the timber exploitation began in earnest, and the timber company really just went at it. Increasingly mechanized timber exploitation also increased the number of board feet that were being produced, and the corresponding environmental degradation unfortunately followed with it. But the Bonds continued to run cattle right until the late 1950s, by which point the family decided to sell the land after the elder Bonds had already died. And a Texas oilman named Pat Dunnigan bought the caldera from the Bond family in the early 1960s for $2.5 million. He did not, however, get the timber rights. They were still separate. Dunnigan was really interested in modern methods of resource management as well as conservation. He was very much a conservationist, sort of in the vein of Teddy Roosevelt. And so he immediately went about reducing cattle numbers significantly. I think he dropped them down to about 3,000 head. And he also started to diversify. He was looking at the geothermal possibilities. There's a number of geothermal wells on the western side of the preserve. He partnered with the DOE for a while looking at exploiting that. He offered trophy hunts of the elk that had been reintroduced. He opened it up to movie shoots, and he worked for the conservation of the land that he owned. And the thing that drove him nuts more than anything else was what the timber company was doing, because really there was not much that he could do to stop them from logging as they pleased. And basically from the day he bought the land, he was in court against the timber company trying to get them to stop and if possible, get the rights back. And so eventually by 1972, he finally was able to prevail and he bought the timber rights for $1.25 million, which was half the amount he'd paid for the entire thing in the first place. And once he'd done that, he ended logging on the caldera for good. But the timber company in the process had put in over 1,000 miles of timber roads and engaged in just spectacularly destructive logging practices. Towards the end, when they sort of saw the writing on the wall, they did what was called cable logging, where they would drive 2 trucks in parallel, one above the other on a hillside with a chain between them, and just rip out any trees that were in the way, which you can imagine how good that was for erosion and things like that. And so there was a lot of work to be done to restore the land. And the problem was the trees that grew back were also not managed. So everything that grew back really densely and the same size and the same age, which, as many of us know, is a recipe for wildfire. But ultimately, Dunnigan did what he could to improve the land and end what had been really terrible practices on the landscape. And he died rather suddenly in 1980, but he had expressed a wish for a really long time that his property would ultimately be public land. In the 1970s, he'd sold a tiny little chunk of it to the Los Alamos Ski Club so they could run their lift up to the Pajarito Mountain. But beyond that, he really wanted this to be public land because he was a big believer in that. It took 20 years, winding its way through Congress and legislative decisions and a lot of push from a lot of people locally and nationally. But to their credit, his family honored his wishes. And in the year 2000, the Valles Caldera National Preserve finally became public land. Uncle Sam, you and I bought it for $101 million, which is about $1,000 an acre. So while that's a big chunk of change, that's really relatively cheap when you think about what we got. And when it was put together as public land, it was going to be managed by a trust. And the idea was that within 15 years, it should become self-sustaining. And I won't get into all the details about why that happened. You can, if you're interested, you can read Craig Martin's book. But obviously, self-sustaining was going to be next to impossible because we just don't have enough people out here in terms of fees for visitors and other things to really support the kind of infrastructure and environmental restoration work that needed to happen. And so as that became increasingly clear as the 15-year date was coming closer, there was another push by a lot of locals as well as national concerns to have the National Park Service take it over because they had a better management plan and deeper pockets. And so ultimately, that was achieved, and in late 2014, National Park Service took it over and it became Valles Caldera National Preserve, and they are now in charge of managing it. And so we are really fortunate to have this, that this stayed together essentially as 100,000 acres through all of that is really remarkable and almost unheard of. When it did finally become public land, some lands were ceded to Bandelier in the southeast corner because it was tied to the Upper Frijoles watershed. The northeast corner went to Santa Clara Pueblo because that was part of some sacred headwaters for them. And so the remaining landscape is about 90,000 acres. But as I say, the fact that this was intact as one parcel and then is surrounded by national forest and all this other public land, we are really, really lucky to have this. So a couple things before you go. As I mentioned, infrastructure is kind of weak. So there's a few things to consider when you hit the trails. GPS is absolutely essential. This is a screenshot from US Forest Service map of Valle Jaramillo. All those things on there that look like trails, those are all the timber roads. Some of those still exist on the ground, some of them don't. There are some that are not marked on there that are on the ground. And signage and route signs are incredibly poor throughout the preserve. That's one of the big projects that the preserve needs to do. So it's critical that you have a GPS because it can get really, really confusing on the ground. And big surprise, there's little to no cell service. And so if you get lost or you wander down the wrong timber road thinking it's the right one, it could end up being a very, very long day. So I can't stress that enough, no matter how experienced you are. I've been lost back there many times. It's really important to have your GPS and a compass with you. To access the backcountry trails, most of them require a backcountry drive permit. You can get those for free from the visitor center, from the rangers there. They are first come, first serve, and they are limited. I believe right now it's about 35 permits per day. If you go up during the week, you don't really have to worry about it. They rarely run out, but if you go up on the weekend, it's quite busy. So it's best to be there first thing. Right now, the preserve is on winter hours due to COVID, and so they're open from 9 to 5. And so, people line up in front of the gate by 8:30, waiting to get in to get their permit. And the hours are important too, because you have to factor in driving time to get to the trailheads. Most of the backcountry trails are at least half an hour from the visitor center. The furthest ones are almost an hour. And so you need an hour out, an hour back, plus your hike time. And you have to be out by 5 o'clock because they lock the gate and then you're going to be stuck. So it is key to pay attention to that. And I do make note of that in the notes in the book, so you know that in advance. I do always encourage everybody to check with rangers for up-to-date conditions, especially in the areas where there's a fair amount of burn damage. There's also all sorts of chances for deadfall, potential for washouts. So do check in with the rangers and see if they have any up-to-date information for you. Obviously, those of us in New Mexico know, check the weather. You don't want to be on a ridge or in an open valley during monsoon season with lots of lightning. And the other thing to be aware of is hunting season. The preserve does allow turkey hunts in April and elk hunts from September through late November. There's never very many hunters back there. It's usually, I think, less than 20 at any given time. You're very unlikely to run into any, but it's good to be aware of that if you are hiking in that season. The majority of the backcountry trails you are not allowed to have a dog on. That's sort of typical National Park Service rules. Some of the front country trails you can. Many of you are probably familiar with Coyote Call or Valle Grande. Those allow dogs, but pretty much anything in the backcountry you can't have a dog. Again, as with much of the Park Service, there's no collection of any kind. So if you see some cool obsidian, take a picture of it, but you can't take it. Don't take antler sheds, plant collection, that sort of thing. And then obviously be bear aware. Again, those of us who live in Los Alamos, we think about bears a lot, but there are quite a few bears on the preserve. I've run into them many times. Lots of elk. There are a few mountain lions even. You'll see some pikas, coyotes, badgers, all sorts of birds. If you're a birder, it's a great place to go. And so you're pretty much guaranteed to see some kind of wildlife every time you go out there. Right now is a great time because the elk are in the rut and you can hear the bugling. And so it's a really nice experience when you're out in the woods all by yourself to hear that. But just remember that it's home to lots of wild animals and you're just a visitor. Okay, so enough of that, on to the hikes. I'm going to talk about 3 of my favorite hikes today, as I mentioned, and then I'll give a couple highlights on a few others at the end. So the first hike, sorry, is this going to work for me? There we go. First hike we're going to talk about is El Cajete Loop. So that's great that we already had a shout out for that trip. This is a really great little trail. I think everybody, lots of people can find it easily accessible, and there's a really beautiful meadow about halfway through. And then the next one we're going to do is Sulphur and Alamo Canyon's Loop. This is probably my favorite trail in the whole preserve, in part because you get to see a lot of really cool geothermal stuff. And it's also in the western side where very little has burned, and so the forests are really quite pretty still. That one also does not require a backcountry permit, which is nice. You access it, this yellow line here is Forest Road, or excuse me, New Mexico 4, and you turn off on Forest Road 105 right by the Thompson Ridge turnoff, Sulphur Canyon, and you drive up to the end of that road and you access it through there. And so because you don't need a permit, you don't have to worry about time frame on your hike. And then the last one we're going to look at is the Northwest Corner Trail, which is probably the least visited section of the preserve, in part because it's the farthest flung corner. But this one has some really nice sort of surprise mini valleys that you don't necessarily know are there until you're right on top of them. And it's really quite pretty in the fall. So I would definitely recommend this one as the aspens start to turn. So first one is El Cajete Loop. This is El Cajete Meadow, as I mentioned, sort of the midpoint of the trip. It starts just back on the northwest side of Valle Grande. And so the trailhead is just at the start of the cabin district for those of you who have been out there. You hike sort of southwest up the valley behind South Mountain. Some of you may have hiked that. That's a relatively popular trail. There's a slight climb up to a saddle. You get some beautiful views down towards Jemez Valley. And then you drop down into a drainage. You follow the drainage and gradually climb up this rim, and then it dumps you out on the western edge of El Cajete Meadow. You skirt the edge of it, the northwestern side, and then you come back around, drop down really quickly, and then retrace your steps. It's 9.4 miles, less than 1,000 feet ascent, and it's relatively moderate. This one you can mountain bike. There's a couple steep bits, and then as we'll go through, there's some washouts that mountain bikers will have to dismount. But otherwise, this is a reasonable trail for bikers as well. So this is the trailhead. As you can see, there's really nothing telling you that this is where you need to go. There are a few brown posts throughout the preserve. These date to the trust days, and so they number some of the roads. That's about all we have for markings on almost any trail. And so it really helps to pay attention to where you are and keep an eye on the map, as I said. It starts right out in front of the cabin district. You head down this little dirt road. This is used by the rangers and some of the scientific researchers, but it's very rare to see cars on it, and they can't go very far because of the washouts anyway. So you head out that way. This is a lovely stretch in the springtime because there's lots of seeps along the way, and so you'll just get whole fields of wild iris. This is also a good place to spot bears. I've seen them poking around in the trees just beyond the edge of the meadow. Once you pass the seeps, the valley starts to close in. This is South Mountain in the background, and you just follow the trail, as I say, sort of heading westward. It'll re-enter the trees. It'll pass the trailhead for South Mountain and Redondo Loop, and then there'll be a quick, short, steep climb, and then you'll reach the top of the saddle. And once you reach the top of the saddle, as I mentioned, you have this beautiful view of out towards Jemez Valley. And this old dirt track gradually brings you down along the drainage to your left and brings you down to the bottom. Once you get down there, this shout out to my friend James, who did this trail with me. There's a couple washouts that you have to scramble through, but the reward for that is some really cool geology. Huge chunks of pumice. James is lifting this massive boulder with his pinky. He was quite proud of himself that day. And then also really large chunks of obsidian. This is not the biggest piece I've found in the preserve, but it's a reasonably good size one. And you'll see all sorts of them as you go through here. The picture on the left, this is the first washout. As you can see, it does require a scramble down. You scramble down and you just follow the wash all the way till it opens out. There'll be a second one that's even more of a scramble. That one you definitely have to get off your bike. The first one you might get away with it. But once you hit the third one, it just scoots along the edge of it. And so the picture on the right is where the drainage sort of opens out just past the third washout. And right after that is where the trail splits. Now you can go either way. I prefer to go clockwise, but it is definitely possible to go counterclockwise. I think it's a little easier to pick up the connecting trail in the meadow if you go clockwise. But once you take the split, we're going to go clockwise, as I said. It becomes a sandy little track. It starts to climb somewhat as it contours around the edge of the rim, and it's gradually bringing you up top. There's a couple steep climbs, but most of it's really pretty easy. You go through these pretty little ponderosa groves. And then the trees get a little bit denser. There's one last steep climb on your left. And then in the picture on the right, just as you get to the top, El Cajete Meadow starts peeking out through the trees. You'll come to the edge of the trees and then you take a sharp right and you start to head north and somewhat west around the edge of the meadow. This is a view of El Cajete Meadow. I think the picture we saw earlier is probably from almost this exact spot. This is a great spot to stop for a picnic. There's a stock pond there. There's a little prairie dog colony. In the springtime, you can hear peeper frogs. Every now and then you'll see some elk coming through, but the tracks on the left are just a little sandy track, and that's basically what you follow all along the edge of the meadow. As you go along the northwest edge of the meadow, keep your eye out in the some of the lava formations. There's a couple really cool air pockets, one of which is a quite large cave that's worth poking around. From there, you'll come up to sort of the northwest corner of the meadow. You'll pass a couple stands of aspen. It's right around here where you can either connect to the Banco Bonito loop or you could connect to Redondo Meadow. Both of those are also quite nice hikes, and they're also really great for mountain bikers. Picture on the right is El Cajete Meadow looking back from the way you've come. This is sort of the northeast side of it, just before it starts to re-enter the trees for its last climb as it leaves the meadow. Here we go, just gentle stretch into the ponderosa, as I mentioned. Quick climb up, and then on the right is a very steep drop down. This could get a little gnarly on a mountain bike because it's pretty loose. It skirts the edge of the last washout, but you don't actually have to climb through it. And it drops you very quickly back at the junction where you split before. And so if you look to the left, this is where you made the decision to go this way, and this is where you join up again. And so once you get back here, it's quite obvious. You just retrace your steps. You have about a half-mile climb back up to that saddle, and then it drops you back down, and you make it back to where you started at the trailhead. So that's El Cajete Meadow. The next one I'm going to talk about is Sulphur and Alamo Canyon's Loop. As I mentioned, this is probably my favorite trail in the preserve, in part because of all the geothermal activity you can see. So as I said, Sulphur and Alamo Canyon Loop starts at the end of Forest Road 105 off of New Mexico 4. There is a gate here. You can just park adjacent to that, hop the gate, totally okay, and then you hike on up Sulphur Canyon. This one, again, I recommend going clockwise, but you can go the other way. I do think clockwise is a little bit better in terms of route finding. You wind your way all the way up Sulphur Creek, and then you take a sharp right turn heading east across Valles Caldera, which is one of the most beautiful back valleys in the whole preserve, I think. Loops you around here along the edge of this rim, and then you drop back down Alamo Canyon Trail to pick up where you left off and head back down to the trailhead. Alamo Canyon gets really tricky. And so again, this is one of those GPS spots, and I'll explain that as we go. This one's about 12.2 miles. The elevation gain is pretty significant, and it's moderate to strenuous, and it can get super strenuous if you go wrong in Alamo Canyon and you end up with far more miles than you intended. But hopefully that's not gonna happen. So here's the trailhead. This is the gate, as I mentioned. It's totally fine to hop the gate. The preserve does not mind at all. Just make sure when you park your car, you don't actually block the gate, because again, the rangers do need access to this area. Once you hop the gate, you just head up this dirt track. It's really obvious. You'll pass some really cool geologic formations from the volcano, and you'll start to see some denuded areas where there's some fumaroles and hot pots. And throughout this hike, there'll be a lot of spots where you'll smell some sulfur. Sometimes you'll see actual steam coming out. About a mile in, you'll go through what used to be a private in-holding. The preserve recently purchased it, so now it's all one intact unit. Unfortunately, there's a fair amount of garbage left there still, like old cars and materials from some geothermal wells. The preserve is going to start clearing that out hopefully soon. But this is a really cool spot, despite that, to poke around and see some of the geothermal activity. On the left, you can see some fumaroles that are just steaming all the time. And on the right, you can see some mud pots just bubbling merrily away. There's quite a few of those back there. And so it's worth exploring a little bit, obviously being careful because it's really hot and stinky. But it's a pretty interesting area if you're interested in this sort of thing. Once you climb out of this denuded area, this sulfurous area, you'll pass some more really cool rock formations. This one's got some caves. This is actually quite a ways up from the road. I wouldn't recommend climbing it, but I suppose it's possible. And then you start going up this beautiful, lush, narrow valley. This is Sulphur Canyon, and Sulphur Creek is running in the grasses through here. It's beautiful, it's green, but it's also smelly because of the sulfur. And then gradually you work your way out of the Sulphur Canyon. It starts to open out just a ways. The picture on the left is heading north. The picture on the right is looking back down the valley. And it will bring you to this junction. And again, this is not marked. This is all you're going to see. The road heads off to the left. Mountain bikers really like this. This takes you all the way up to the Backcountry Road in the northwest section of the preserve. But we want to head right. And so you'll head right and then start heading due west, skirting the edge of Valles Caldera. Once you get to Valles Caldera, there's a really lovely, it originates as a stock pond, but it's really quite pretty. And then the valley opens out and you have no idea it's there until you just sort of stumble upon it. And it's really just spectacular. This is another one of my favorite places, just stop and absorb where I am and enjoy the scenery. What the dirt track will do is it will work its way east along the edge of the valley. It will climb up the mountain that you see off to the left, and it'll skirt the back side of it, and it will eventually loop its way back around. If you get stuck or take a wrong turn when you're trying to go down Alamo Canyon later, it will dump you back out here eventually, but it will add significant mileage to your trail, but at least you'll know where you are. So as you come to the edge of the valley, you'll see another sort of faint split. This is what I'm talking about needing to have a better sense of where you're going and wishing we had some signs. You're going to take a right as opposed to the left, and then you enter the trees and start your climb. And as you start to climb, the picture on the right, you go through a short burned area, but the advantage there is you start getting some nice views of the rim. You can see just through the trees on the right, the North Rim and Logarith summit, which is one of a popular trail in the preserve. So you climb up and then it loops around the back of the ridge, as I said. You get some views as you start heading south along the back of the ridge. This is looking towards the east of the caldera. There's a few spots where you can look down into Valle San Luis, which is right at the base of this ridge. And then you come to where you need to join Alamo Canyon. Now, the picture on the left is all you're going to see. It's a berm and a post. There's nothing there. And so you really have to be paying attention to your mileage and where you are. If you climb up the berm and look down, you'll see the Alamo Canyon Trailhead sign on your right. Now, that was there the last time I was there. I don't know how much longer it's going to be there. And so don't count on it being there, but look for the berm and climb up. Now, once you see that trailhead sign, just head past it. And the trick here is instinct says, go down the drainage, but really that's not what you want to do. And the problem is there's almost no sign of a trail whatsoever. So it takes some real thinking and care to make sure you end up going the way you want to go. This is what you'll see. Ultimately, what you want to be doing is you go just past the trailhead sign, down a little ways, and then you actually start contouring westward. And so the difficulty is, at least at first, there's no clear Jeep track, there's no clear trail, and from the picture on the right, you can see there is a ton of deadfall. And this is a real bummer because once this deadfall is clear, this will make a magnificent mountain bike loop. But for now, Alamo Canyon is completely impassable to bikers. You can get through it hiking. It's totally doable. It just gets a little tedious. So you have to sort of wind your way westward, roughly contouring, picking your way over the deadfall. And eventually, as you can see in the picture on the left, you do start to see an old faint timber road. That's what you want to pick up. And then you keep sort of contouring around the edge of this as it brings you further and further westward. And then it will become much clearer after about half a mile. And then it will drop you down quite quickly. And then the picture on your right is the upper end of Alamo Canyon. Now here again, you can see there's really no clear trail, but once you're down here, you're fine. All you do is just head down canyon. As long as you keep going in that direction westward, you're not going to get lost. And it does eventually pick up with the Jeep track. But the upper end of it, as I say, is a little hard to tell where you are. Once you start heading down, you're going to pass the first of 3 geothermal ponds. This is the first one. It bubbles. It's got some pretty colors. Sometimes it smells like sulfur. And then you can keep going. You'll reach a second pond. This one is a little bit bigger, a little more denuded, but still really kind of fascinating to explore. And then on the picture on the right, you get a little further past that, and you can see just in the right-hand side of the picture here, a cut starts to appear where a Jeep track was. And then once you've found that, it's really a piece of cake. And then it becomes more and more clear as a track to bring you further down the canyon. Once you've done that, you will reach the third pond. This is, I think, the most beautiful of all 3. It's the biggest. You can see that really spectacular color there on the right-hand side. That was just taken a couple weeks ago. And there's a little prairie dog colony that pokes around here as well. This is also a really nice spot to sit and rest. It's also not far from where it picks up the main trail. So if you just wanted to come up from the trailhead and come see this, it's only a couple miles in. So that's also a nice thing if you only have a little bit of time instead of doing the whole trail. Once you pass the last pond, you'll go through another sort of denuded area where there's some sulfur vents. And then shortly after that, where the area ends, you will reach, as you see in the picture on the right, the junction with Sulphur Canyon. And then you'll take a left at the fence on the main road, and then you just head back to the trailhead. So you do pass this little junction on your way up the trail when you first start, but it's not marked at all. And so the best way to keep an eye out for it is where these exclosures, this fence line ends, and there's this little area that looks like maybe the start of a trail. That's the beginning of Alamo Canyon. So if you're gonna do it in reverse, this is where you wanna turn, or you do it like the way I just explained and you just end up here and you head back and you're back where you started. So the third trail I'm going to talk about then is the Northwest Corner Trail. This one, as I mentioned, is in the furthest northwest corner of the preserve. Almost nobody goes on this one. A lot of people don't even know it's there. But this one, I think, is a really nice example of some of the delights of the backcountry, because when I did this trail, I had no idea that these pretty little valleys were tucked back in there, and they were really wonderful surprises when I stumbled upon them when I was hiking it. This one can be two different lengths depending on if a gate is open. So if the gate is open, it's only 9.7 miles. If the gate is not open, it's 12.3 miles. I list that as an extension in the guidebook because the backcountry road theoretically will go all the way to the trailhead, but this stretch has been locked for at least probably 8 or 9 months because that stretch of road is in pretty rough shape. And so you may have to park your car here and walk down this bit before you get to the actual trailhead. So I give both distances and instructions in the guidebook in case that's the situation that you find. It's it's a reasonable elevation gain whether you get the short version or the long version, but it's really not that difficult of a trail. The climb, none of the climbs are terribly steep. And it's just an out and back, but it gets you all the way up to the northwest boundary of the preserve. And as I say, gives you some sort of little secret glimpses of some back valleys. This is the trailhead you'll probably find if the gate is blocked. This is what I meant. This is where you'll park your car. It is not marked in any way. It's just the end of the backcountry road. And so you can park next to it and just walk around the post and then head on down the road until you get to the actual trailhead. You'll be heading westward down via San Antonio. This is looking back towards where you would have left your car if you had to do that. And you have a slight climb as you get close to the actual trailhead. This one, as I mentioned, is a great trail to do in the fall because there's some really nice aspen groves. This is the actual trailhead. Again, nothing telling you that's where you need to be, but that's where it is. And so you just walk right around it, follow these faint tracks, and head up this short little drainage before you start to contour around the hillside. This is an example of where some of these timber roads can get confusing. In this situation, it's fortunate in that the one on the right that's obviously more worn is the one that you actually want. Sometimes the trail that you want is the less worn one. And so again, this is why GPS and compass skills are really helpful because it's very easy to get confused. In this case, you just take a sharp right and you start to contour around the little back lava dome, going through some nice ponderosa groves. The picture on the left, you're looking back down towards Via San Antonio as it starts to climb gradually around the lava dome. And the picture on the right is just this nice wide open track. This trail, I think, is pretty good for mountain bikes. There's almost no deadfall. And so, you know, it is a gradual ascent the whole way, but it can be a really nice day out on a bike. Here we go, just heading up some small meadows. Here again, you can see there's a faint trail off to the right, but again, in this situation, it's nice and clear. And it just starts to, really, as long as you trend northward, you're gonna be fine. Continuing on up, you'll see some leftovers from the cattle ranching days. There's bits of fence all throughout the preserve. Some of the volunteer crews have been working on removing that, but there's probably thousands of miles of it, so you will run into it periodically. But you just continue your way up, as I say, heading north, gradually climbing upwards until you hit Pipeline Road. And this runs across the preserve. This then becomes Pipeline in Los Alamos. And I put these three here just to give you an example of sort of what you have to figure out, you know, in some situations. So the picture on the far left, this is when the trail dumps you out on Pipeline. You see obviously the sign for Pipeline, you see an old trust sign for hunting unit, but there's no trail markers, nothing. Here, what you need to do is take a left. You head westward and you go slightly up and then slightly down. That's the picture in the middle. And then after it drops you down a little ways, you want to pick up a trail that's marked on the picture on the right, VCO 901, but you don't actually see that sign from the trail. You have to keep an eye on it. Keep an eye out for it. You have to dig into the trees a little bit before you see it from the trail. The only advantage here is that VCO9 then actually ends at a boundary fence and a gate. And so you'll know you've gone too far. And if you back up just a little bit, that's the meadow that you want to get to anyway. But it's definitely helpful if you can find 0901 because of where you want to go after that. So this is Twin Cabins Canyon. This is the meadow that you actually come into when you get on 0901, or if you've gone too far, you backtrack to it. And this picture doesn't do it justice. It is just the prettiest little meadow, and it feels like it's a secret you stumbled upon that nobody else in the world knows about. And it was just the most magnificent day we were there. The aspen starting to turn, these amazing clouds. And for me, this picture is one of the ones that just sort of epitomizes some of the magic that happens when you're back there. And so this is one of many little secrets that you can find when you go out on your own out there. So you head up north across this little meadow. Here on the left, you head up through across the meadow and into the trees. It gets kind of faint as you get towards the trees heading north, which is not too bad because you can pretty much figure out where you need to go. On the way back, it gets a little difficult to read on the ground, but as long as you just head south on the way back and hit Pipeline, you'll be fine. Once you're in the trees, the picture on the right, as you can see, the forest gets quite dense, and you know it's so dense it's not healthy, but it's really nice to see so many trees after so many areas around here have burned, and this is where you start to get into some of the really nice aspen groves. As you can see on the left again, the trail is very clear. It's a little sandy, but it's pretty obvious where you're going. The picture on the right, this is another little secret hidden meadow that you stumble through as you head towards the northwest corner. Again, you don't have any idea that it's there until you break out of the trees, and then it's this lovely little surprise as you get there. Cross the meadow, heading further north, and then finally you reach the northwest boundary fence. This is another beautiful little meadow, really nice place for a picnic. It's a great, this is your turnaround spot. So it's really nice to rest and relax and enjoy where you are, and then retrace your steps all the way back to the trailhead. So those are sort of my top three, but there are quite a few others. I talk about over over 2 dozen in my book. So there's lots of opportunities and places to explore. Those of you from around here probably recognize this view. This is from Cañada Bonita looking down into Valle Grande. You can access the preserve from that trail. You can drop down in and come around the backside and reach Valle Grande that way. But there are quite a few spots where you can really find some great opportunities on the trail. One of the ones I'd like to mention is Cerrosecco Loop. There's a picture from this vantage point that's on the front of the guidebook. I did not think I was going to like this trail. I kind of put it off because a lot of it had burned, and I thought, oh, well, it's not going to be very pretty. And I ended up absolutely loving it. It's just over 7 miles. It's not difficult. There's a little ascent at the first, and then it contours around the lava dome. But you get views that are just spectacular, including into some back valleys that really nobody ever goes to. And it's a huge wildlife corridor. I have never failed to see elk here. I see bears here quite frequently. So this is a fantastic trail and really accessible to a lot of people. The other one, I mentioned this earlier, this is from Logarith Summit Trail. This is probably the best view in the entire preserve. This one is a little over 7 miles as well. It's quite steep. It's an out and back, so you climb from the valley up to the north rim, and then you get this just fantastic view. That's Redondo Mountain in the distance. On a clear day, you can see the Sandias, and really it's about as close to a full view of the entire preserve as you're going to get. There's also Cerrosecco Loop. This is also on the western side of the preserve. This is a little over 11 miles. It's a long, steady, but not terribly steep ascent for the first couple of miles. And then it too loops around, contouring around a lava dome. And at the end of it, you get this magnificent view looking east out over the caldera. And this is a really good one for wildflowers in the springtime. And then lastly, Redondo Creek and Miro Pond Trail. This one was an absolute delight. I didn't expect to see such a pretty pond at the end of it. I mean, it had the name, but you never know what you're going to find. And it goes up the western side of the preserve. It goes through where offices of a geothermal company used to be. And so you'll pass some geothermal wellheads. There's a bit of a steep climb, but then it too contours around the backside of Redondo Mountain, well below the summit, so it's okay to hike this one. And then it ends up at this beautiful pond. This one too, I think, is a wonderful one to do in the fall. But here too, you know, very good chances of wildlife sighting. I ran into a bear more than once on this one, so be aware of that too. But coming up to this pond is just is a wonderful wonderful experience, especially on a beautiful fall New Mexico day. So for those of you who are interested, who don't have the guide yet, it's not on Amazon. It's only being sold locally. So please, you know, support our local businesses, support PEEC and the Los Alamos History Museum, Bandelier National Monument, and the Valles Bookstore when it's open. Carry it. And then Amanda's store in La Cueva, as well as 4 bookshops in Santa Fe. It's really important, especially now that we support our local small businesses. So I hope those of you who are interested, you'll be able to get a copy. And I really encourage everybody, if you haven't been out to the caldera, if you haven't experienced the backcountry, please do. It's the most amazing place. It's our backyard, and we are so lucky to have it here. And so I really hope that, you know, more people will be able to experience it. And if people hike trails and things have changed and you've got suggestions or anything like that, please feel free to get in touch, because I'd love to take people's ideas and suggestions and their know-how and put it in future editions, because, you know, this was an effort for the community, and I really want this to help as many people as possible. And so I just want to say thanks to the Los Alamos Mountaineers for asking me here to do the talk. Thank you to PEEC for hosting it. And of course, thank you to the Valles staff and volunteers who make this amazing place possible for all of us. So thanks very much, everybody.
Wow, thank you so much, Coco. That was amazing. You're just, I can't believe that's only 3 or 4 or 5 that you mentioned out of 24. I can't wait to go through this book. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do is ask you to start your video, and I will do the same, just so everybody can kind of put a face with who's talking tonight. Yeah, and we do have a couple questions, so if you're game, we can start those.
I'll do my best.
And everybody, please continue to type your questions into the chat, and I'll watch over there and try to keep up. But the ones that we've had so far, somebody had just a general question of why aren't there trees in these giant meadows? They thought that, you know, it seemed like the trees should take over, match the surrounding forest, but that's just not the case. And why is that?
Well, it's actually really cool. At least 4 times in the caldera's history, there was a lake inside of the caldera, that there was no outflow. Those of you who've been up there know East Fork of the Jemez River flows through there, along with San Antonio Creek and Jaramillo Creek, and those drain the caldera, and ultimately they flow to the Rio Grande. But for at least 4 periods of time, geologically speaking, we know that there was no outflow. And so what that means is there is a ton of sediment, like I think several miles worth. No, that's an exaggeration. But there's a ton of sediment, and the mineral content is not conducive for the kinds of trees that grow at this altitude. And so that's one reason. And the other reason is that it's actually, basically it acts as a cold sink. And so it's quite common that it can actually be colder down in Valle Grande than it is up in the hills. And so there's too many days below freezing for saplings to really take hold. And so the result is that what you have is a reverse tree line. It's not that it's been overgrazed and destroyed, it's that there are never going to be trees there because of those 2 factors, which I think is one of the kind of cool things about the preserve. You don't see that very often.
All right, thank you. Next, actually, I want to mention that a couple people have asked if we're going to record or make the recording available, because that was just so much information and photos and everything. So yes, we're recording it, and it usually takes us about a week or 2 to get them up. But there is a videos section of the PEEC website. I can put a link in the chat. And so everybody can go back and reference it later if you need. Let's see. All right, and the next question coming in. Can you get permits in advance, or are they only day of?
It's only day of, unfortunately, and it's first come, first serve.
All right, another permits question. Do they stop at the end of September, or are they just reduced in numbers for you mentioned winter hours?
Oh yeah, so in normal times, in summer, they're open 8 to 6, and that's when the Backcountry Road is open. And summer season usually runs from about mid-May to the end of October, typically. I don't know what the situation is going to be this year. As I said, they're on winter hours, 9 to 5, but the Backcountry Road is open. Whether they close that at the end of October or leave it a little bit longer, I don't know what they're going to do. I think it's going to depend on, the COVID situation. In normal times, it also depends on the roads, if the snow has come already, because that's primarily why they close the Backcountry Road in the winter, is because it's not maintained or plowed. And it's dirt, it's not paved.
Okay, so good to get those sort of beta ahead of time. All right, a couple more logistics questions. If the gate gets locked before you exit, is there anyone spending the night inside the park or watching out for that?
No, there is not. The rangers do have a system where if someone has not come out, they do leave instructions and a special lock that you can get out. That's again normal times. They haven't had volunteers up there since the shutdowns, and so I don't know what the current plans are, or what the current policy is, but that's typically what they've done. Is they, you're not going to get stuck out there, but it's just inconvenient.
All right. Someone said they've heard of special permits being issued for Redondo Peak. Is this true? What's the process, if so?
Nope, no hiking on Redondo Peak.
All right. What about backpacking? Actually, a couple people have asked about.
No, there's no backpacking yet. Everybody would give anything for it, me included. Right now, it's day use only. The reasoning is that the infrastructure is still really poor. Like there's no pit toilets in the backcountry like you find in preserves, in national parks elsewhere. As I've said, there's very little trail signage, very little mapping. There's no designated camping areas or anything like that. And so that is a goal, but when that happens, I don't know. Unfortunately not.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody would be super excited to hear any updates about that. Someone wanted to know if there's a memorial to Dunnigan recognizing his contribution to via conservation.
I don't believe that there's anything like a plaque or anything like that. I think there may be some stuff on their website. I'm not sure. They were doing a bunch of updating. Certainly, when tours are given or when you talk with the rangers, they certainly acknowledge that. But I don't know that there's anything official out there.
All right. A couple people asked about your geology finds and some of the cultural finds that you were showing. I guess just a quick reminder that there is no collecting available in the allowed in the Valles Caldera, including the obsidian.
Yes.
Okay, that was just a concert.
Those pictures are only pictures. They went right back on the ground where I found them.
Great, just a confirmation there. Thank you.
Yeah, especially don't take the obsidian. The archaeologists need it so that they can study.
For sure. Does the preserve have any plans to add signage and maintain the trails that you were talking about?
Someday. There's funding is always an issue. The Park Service has deeper pockets than the preserve, but that's not saying a lot. Certainly, I know there's a citizens group, Caldera Action, that's been really involved with the caldera, and they were instrumental in getting it, adopted as public lands in the first place. I know they've been doing some work on trying to get some signage, some signage plans together. Some work has been done in the front country. Some of the shorter trails have a little bit more signage now. And I know it's a goal long term, but government moves at a very slow pace. So I don't know beyond that. I certainly hope so, because it needs it. It really does.
So a couple more maps and wayfinding questions.
Mhm.
Are the GPS coordinates available for electronic download anywhere?
They are not. I'm kind of an analog person, so I list them in the book, but I have not posted them, in part because my GPX tracks are not clean, because I hiked these multiple times and there were times I got lost and everything. And so I'm kind of hesitant to put those out there if they're not as accurate as they could be. I know that the park's GIS guy is working on doing some stuff like that, but time frame I don't know otherwise, unfortunately. When I did the maps and my GPSing, I used Gaia for iOS, and I found that to be really probably the best app out there. Definitely the subscription level gives you more functionality, and I felt like that was probably your safest bet when you were out there, was using that.
Yeah, and you can download the maps so that you have it on airplane mode. You don't have to.
You don't need connectivity for it at all, and it's really pretty good. And so that would be my best recommendation.
Speaking of maps, someone wants to know where you got the topographic maps you showed.
I made those. I used CalTopo open source software and uploaded my GPX tracks and cleaned them up, and then did all the icons and everything myself. But anybody can make maps with a GPX track using CalTopo.
A couple questions about led or guided hikes, which PEEC usually does. We're working in to get to do that again with small groups, but someone asked, do you have any suggestions for shorter and easier wildflower hikes this fall?
Certainly, I think even just doing a little bit, like you could go, in my book it's labeled Cerro del Medio. If you did the first leg of it, which is only, if you did a round trip, the first leg, it would be 6 miles, but you could cut it off wherever you want. It would just be an out and back. You go up what's called Obsidian Valley, because the obsidian, there's so much obsidian there, like there's boulders of obsidian, but there's also a really nice area for wildflowers because it's a little narrow valley and there's a drainage in there with the stream. And so that's a possibility. Certainly, I mean, I know everybody does it, but Coyote Call's got some great wildflowers too. And then along the edges of some of the tree line, certainly in the back around maybe the start of the Cerrosecco hike heading up the valley. And again, you could just do an out and back, just a few miles, go to the edge of the tree line, and you probably have good luck there too. It's been pretty dry, so a lot of the pictures I shared I took last summer when it was epically green, but certainly there's still some wildflowers out there to be seen.
I was up near Caballo this past weekend, and I was amazed at the number of wildflowers that are still out. It is,
yeah,
with no rain.
Really helped.
Yeah. The next question is it might actually be some of the same answers. What are some easy trails that would be good for children?
The Logarith Loop, which is right by the visitor center, it's not very long, it's a mile and a quarter. It goes around the little lava dome that's right behind the visitor center. And I actually really like that trail. You go through the prairie dog colony, which the kids always love. Sometimes you get lucky and see badgers and coyotes out. There's the elk like to pass right through there. And so you have good chance of seeing those. You can explore a little bit on Logarith itself. There's some cool rock formations. And it's not hard. It's, it's a very, very gentle stroll. And you really get a good feel for the Valle and in that short little bit. So that would be a great one for kids. Another really nice one for kids is just going out to the pond that's in the middle of the Valle Grande. That's a mile round trip, totally flat. You can see birds there. Wildflowers are good there. And you're smack in the middle of the Valle Grande. So that's fantastic. And then really, I would just encourage people to get a backcountry drive permit and then just go drive in the backcountry, get out and walk around and wander around and, look at the stream, look at the fishermen, look for wildlife, look for flowers. I mean, there's really no place you can't stop and start to explore. And so there's lots of possibilities for families with kids.
And another shameless plug for PEEC's passport program. Both of those that you just mentioned, Logarith and the pond, are in the passports, and you can make a little scavenger hunt out of it. Okay, so someone asked, you mentioned books by Fraser Goff and Craig Martin.
Yes.
Could you rename those? And then I think we might have both of them at PEEC, and in the same sorts of local gift shops and bookstores you mentioned.
Fraser Goff's is Valles Caldera Geologic History. It's very accessible. It's really written for the layman. And he's probably the leading expert on the caldera at the moment. He's built his career on studying the geology there. So it's really fascinating. It's not thick at all. It's got some great diagrams. And then the other one by Craig Martin is Valle Grande, History of Baca Location #1. He talks a little bit about pre-Spanish history, but mostly focuses on Cabeza de Vaca, the Cabeza de Vaca family forward, and really digs into a lot of the 20th century history too. So that too is very accessible. It's written for anybody. He's got a bunch of really great archival photos from the Los Alamos Historical Society in there too.
Yeah, those are two very accomplished and knowledgeable people.
Yeah.
All right, I'm kind of trying to go through on the chat now and see the ones that have come in recently. A couple requests for you to lead a guided hike or two, and we would love to talk to you about that. That would be really fun. Lots of thanks. Such a great job, stellar job. Someone asked you to, I think you mentioned in the beginning, how many permits are issued each day?
35.
35 for the backcountry, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
All right.
And as I said, during the week, they almost never run out. So if you're able to get up Monday through Friday, you don't have to worry as much.
And then downloading, I think we mentioned this one too, the Gpx files. Some of those are crowdsourced on like Gaia or All Trails. I don't know about downloading.
I've seen some on All Trails. I have not looked at those very carefully. Those are put up by other people. And the ones on Gaia, as I said, I just did mine for myself, and I have not posted my GPX because I don't feel comfortable with them being clean enough for people to follow them accurately without some serious fixing. So for a comprehensive GPX list for the whole preserve, I don't know if there's one out there yet.
Okay, somebody wants to know how many Caldera staff are there right now?
I honestly don't know. They always hire some seasonal staff, but because of the shutdowns and funding issues, I know they were shorthanded. I think they're at about 50 total, but I really don't know for certain. That's my best guess, but I can't say for certain. And as I said, volunteers haven't been allowed to be up there since March, so I'm a little behind on current details on that front.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with everybody. And I will just mention real quick that we're right at 8:30, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time if anyone needs to go. But if you're okay, Coco, I'll ask you just a couple more questions.
For sure.
Right.
I would say too, for people who have to go, I do mention in my book, I have an email address for stuff about trails. So if you've got questions you want to send me, it's in there, feel free. And I'll be sure to answer you and happy to help in whatever way I can.
Thank you so much for that. That's, I think you'll get a couple takers.
Totally fine.
All right, how far is the Hidden Valley Trail and where does it come back out?
Oh, okay. So it's the Hidden Valley Trail is about just under 3.5 miles round trip. Where you go in, if you come in the main entrance road, you go in by the missing cabin, which is the cabin that's sort of nestled on top of a small knoll as you're driving down. You drop behind it and then you turn westward following East Fork of the Jemez River, and you just follow it all the way to the fence line. You can actually hop the fence line and keep going, and eventually you'll pop out on Highway 4, but that adds a bit more distance. And so the Hidden Valley Trail, as I describe it in the book, is just under 3.5 miles. It can be a little marshy, but otherwise it's actually a really, really lovely trail. That actually would not be a bad one for kids either.
Yeah, we take a lot of school groups down there,
It's
just to the entrance of the valley.
rock formations are so beautiful.
It's wonderful. All right, more thank yous, lots more thank yous. Is the Rito de los Indios trail mountain bike accessible?
Yeah, you could totally mountain bike that one. Absolutely. It's a steady ascent the whole way, but it's not super steep. It doesn't get up to a rim like Logarith does. And so, yeah, you absolutely could. There's basically no deadfall. It can be a little rocky and loose, but it's not so steep that you're going to run into problems. And it's definitely, nothing's technical. So yeah, you could bike that.
All right, thank you. You mentioned a couple times seeing a lot of bears. What do you normally do when you see one?
Don't run. Definitely don't do that. What you really want to do is wave your arms, make a lot of noise, don't make eye contact, and back away. Generally, you know, you probably see them before they see you, unless obviously the wind is not in your favor. But I really just try to get out of there as quickly and as smoothly as possible without attracting attention. But as I said, you definitely don't want to run. You have to keep your cool, which I will say, doing some hikes by myself, running into a mama bear and a cub all by myself with no radio, nothing, sort of gave me pause. So just, you know, keep your cool and move away as quickly as you can without running.
All right, great. A couple more, just thanks for a great book. It's been a big help in exploring the Valle.
Yay.
Thanks for all your research, and it must have been a tough job, and they just really appreciate you taking the time to write that, and for everyone's benefit. Just a wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
Someone mentioned an interactive GPS map linked on the Valle website, produced by Avenza Maps. It's free, and they used it to take Banco Bonito to El Cajete Meadow, and it worked out great. Have you had any experience with that one?
Avenza's okay. The one advantage it has is it has the old trust trail numbers like that I reference in the book, like VC10, VC09, and that I think is really handy. And so I sort of use that as a backup. But I think Gaia is still better. I think it gives you, there's more of the reality on the ground than Avenza does. But that's personal preference. Some people may find Avenza better.
All right, and then is the Northwest Corner Trail the only longer backcountry trail that you can reach without getting a vehicle permit?
Northwest Corner Trail, actually, you do need a vehicle permit for that one. Sulphur and Alamo Canyons, you don't. There's 4 that you don't need a permit for. You don't need Sulphur and Alamo Canyon. You do not need Redondo and Miro Pond. You don't need Banco Bonito, and you don't need for Redondo border. Those are all accessed off of forest roads on Highway 4. They're the last 4 listed in the book.
Great. I was just going to ask, like, is that clear in the book?
Yeah, I made a point of saying that too in the book, so you know.
All right. Somebody's just said you can use CalTopo to map a track and then generate a GPX that can be downloaded onto your watch or your phone. Yep. Charlie said, San Antonio done without a permit from 105.
You can definitely do that. It's just a little longer. I don't know the exact mileage on that, but yeah, you absolutely can do it from there. You could do Cerrosecco from there too.
Okay, and then I'm getting lots of comments that the book is now sold out on the PEEC website again.
I've got more. And I should say thank you to all of you who were patient and not getting one right away. I know there was a backlog. It was way more popular than I expected. And so my printer was doing everything they could to keep up, but I think we're on top of it now. So thank you for your patience.
And maybe we'll put this information in the email with the survey link, but we do have a waiting list. You can email our gift shop manager, Ashley, and I'll put her email address in the chat as well. Travel Bug apparently still has copies.
Collected Works should have some too.
Collected Works, okay.
Garcia Street Books just got a delivery, and Opsite I think might be out. And so Los Alamos History Museum should have some. Their website says they're out, but I delivered some last week, so they should have some.
And we usually get them to PEEC in like a week or.
If Ashley tells me tomorrow, I can bring them tomorrow afternoon.
All right. All
Unless
right.
there's more than like 300. So.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll let everybody know Ashley's email address for that, and have a couple of other options to get to it. But I don't see any more questions in yet. People are just saying, that is so cool. Thank you so much. Gosh, yeah, just a wealth of information. We can't thank you enough for sharing.
Thanks, and I'm so glad people like it. It's just I want people to discover this place. It's just amazing.
I think that's one of the biggest things that the Caldera needs right now is like people
Support.
there enjoying it and people on the trails and yeah. All right. Well, if anybody else has anything last minute, I'll watch for it. But otherwise, I'll go ahead and end it here in just a second. Anything last minute, Coco, or there you go. Krista got the.
Thank you guys again. I really appreciate it, and thanks to the community for being so supportive. And I hope you have a great time out on the trails, and just be safe and enjoy yourselves.
All right. Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks.